Texas, we need to talk. There's this general election coming up in about 3 weeks. Early voting here in Texas starts on Monday, October 21st. And there's more on that ballot than just the presidential race. The race for our Texas Senate seat in D.C. is up for grabs. Now, this only happens once every 6 years, so I want each one of you to do the work to find out who's running and who you want to support. Do not leave this or any race unmarked on your ballot. This is too important a year on every level of government. Yes, it might take a bit of work, and yes, it can be very confusing. And sometimes it's hard to know who to believe and easy to think that all politicians lie. But there are some mighty good folks running all down that ballot, so I'm asking you to vote informed. Now, our current Texas two-term senator is Mr. Ted Cruz. He was elected in the Tea Party victories of 2012 and has represented the state of Texas ever since. Now, it was all fun and games when folks were running around with tea bags hanging off their hats, but a lot of those Tea Party people have not proven to be very trustworthy. Most Texans know who Ted Cruz is. Now, if you don't, go ahead and do some internet searching about him. You know how. Read about his 2016 remarks about the current Republican candidate for president. Read about his 2021 vacation taken while Texans were suffering from the extreme ice storm. Look at his voting record. If he is so upset about your taxes, then ask yourself why he voted against the Tax Relief Workers Act that would have given some breathing room to American families. He voted against helping students get out from under lifelong shady business practices that create continual debt, as well as funding for Pell Grants. So he seems to be favoring living in a state of minimally educated folks. He voted against military construction funding, which keeps a lot of folks, both private and military, employed. That same bill funded Veterans Affairs and Veterans Health and Benefits departments. But that's not the kind of business he supports. Our senator from Texas voted against additional funding for the Departments of Homeland Security, Treasury, Defense, and Health and Human Services. There was even an extension for the National Flood Insurance Program that he voted against. And I'm thinking that right about now there's a few folks out in North Carolina, Florida, and Georgia who might think that was a mistake. And like any good GOP lackey, he voted against the Bipartisan Border Act of 2024, the one that could have helped alleviate the backlog of asylum seeker applications and boost funding for the Border Patrol agents and their infrastructure. By the way, under the Biden-Harris administration, illegal border crossings are down to their lowest level in years. Now, I don't care what you've heard to the contrary, that's a fact. The father of daughters, Ted Cruz, voted against protecting IVF and against the Right to Contraception Act. And he placed no vote at all on the Reproductive Freedom Act for women. Now, we know he supports criminalizing abortion and endangering women for his own religious appeasement, but since he also voted against helping to fund Ukraine's fight for democracy, we can assume he is just pro-some life. That same National Security Act he voted no on would have helped fund efforts to assist in dismantling fentanyl, guns, and human trafficking into our country. Now, why do you think he did that? Yeah, you may ask. Granny, what did he do or support these last 12 years? Well, let me tell you. To be fair, he did vote yes on a bill that would have limited the Environmental Protection Agency's ability to go after chronic and new polluters, and he was a co-sponsor of a joint resolution that trash-talked many of our energy conservation standards. So I'm thinking he is okay with messing with Texas air, water, and natural spaces. What do you think? But most of the time he spent working on these resolutions that just disapproved of the work the Senate was doing, which was actually trying to get some things changed for the average working American family and not just the wealthy and well-connected. Now, you might be thinking that Texas is confused if she thinks most hard-working, good Texas folks support his ineffective way of governing and serving with the constant whining and complaining. You see, we are church-going folks, so we know how to come together in times of need to help our neighbors. When folks need help, Texans are there with everything from casseroles to carpentry to cash. But poor Ted seems to lack the want to help anyone but himself or to please anyone besides his political party. Some days it can seem a bit embarrassing to admit to being a Texan. After all, we're home to the one physician in this country who thinks Donald Trump is the epitome of good health. We've sent some people to Washington, D.C. who have claimed some mighty weird things. But one of the smart things Texas did, besides not putting our weight on our driver's licenses, is to elect smart people like Congressman Colin Allred. After serving these last 6 years in the U.S. House of Representatives, which means he's been reelected more times than Ted Cruz, I figure he's doing a good job for his district. Now, unlike the Canadian Ted Cruz, Colin was born in Texas. He's a Texan through and through, 4th generation. His mama was a Dallas public school teacher and his granddaddy, a World War II Navy veteran who lived and worked as a customs officer on the Texas-Mexico border. Now, y'all heard of that, right? As class president at Hillcrest High School in Dallas, Colin earned a scholarship to play football with the Baptist at Baylor University, where he served as team captain and graduated with a degree in history. What a radical idea. History. His plans for law school took a little bit of a detour as he played for the NFL for 5 years first. But once he got his law degree, he spent his time working as a civil rights attorney, concentrating on defending Texans' right to vote. He served in the Obama administration at the Department of Housing and Urban Development, ensuring that families had access to affordable housing and were treated fairly by their landlords and banks. And that's a good thing, don't you think? As a former voting rights lawyer, he has served on the Foreign Affairs Committee and understands how important securing democracy for our allies and supporting NATO are. While in Congress, he has not spent his time complaining about his fellow Congress folks who were actually getting things done for the American people. He has worked with Republicans on major bipartisan issues. This includes working across the aisle with the other Texas Senator, John Cornyn, to pass the first meaningful gun safety law in this country in 30 years. Colin Allred supports the Affordable Care Act, Veterans PAC Act, CHIPS Act, and infrastructure law. Now, if you don't know what those are, you better read up on them before you go vote. 70% of the bills he has co-sponsored have been bipartisan. He knows how to work with others. He is also endorsed by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and leading labor unions. Let's not be the state that couldn't get rid of Ted Cruz, who is known as the most hated man in the Senate because of his inability to work with others. I feel about him sort of like Al Franken once said. I like Ted Cruz more than most people, and I hate Ted Cruz. So now it's up to you to choose who you want to vote for. Do your own research and don't just take Granny's word. I encourage you to investigate every race up and down your ballot to see how different candidates are going to affect your everyday life here in Texas. It all comes down to who we want to be as Texans, what we want to be known for. So I'll see your well-informed selves at the polls. Love you. Texas Granny.